Today, we become legends.
In the early days of the Smite Pro League, a team emerged that was so dominant that they are still, to this day, the only team to win Worlds back-to-back with the same roster. While arguments can be made that more modern teams play better overall, no team can match what these boys did back in Season 2 and 3. This is the story behind Epsilon Esports and their legendary 2-year-long run in the Smite Pro League. We begin in early 2015 when the original Panthera roster was signed to a new org, Epsilon Esports. The GOAT of the jungle, Kenneth adapting Ross, still playing in the Pro League today on an all-star roster, Peter Ninja Dimi Dimitrov, later name changed to just Dimi in the solo lane, Andre Yamin Branval, one-time MVP mid laner, Craig Irafa Rathbone in support, and Emil Emilito Starnman, also one-time MVP in the ADC role, along with their coach, long-time SPL player since the early days, Youngbei. And unlike other videos discussing the SPL, this is the only roster we'll need to cover in this video, as this team stuck together to the very end and went on an incredible run throughout 2015 and 16, placing second at the Season 2 EU Regionals, first in the EU Fall Split, and one of their only disappointing results of this time, fourth in the EU Summer Season Round Robin Tournament. But would this deter the Epsilon boys going into World Season 2? Absolutely not. With $500,000 on the line, adapting, Dimi, Yamin, Rafa, and Emil stormed into the World Championship. While top teams at the Summer LAN, such as Cloud9 from the NA side and Paradigm, EU's main rival at the time to Epsilon from the EU side, received automatic buys into the quarterfinals, Epsilon had to fight through the lower qualifier bracket against Isurus and then Pain Gaming from Brazil. These were simply best of one sets and Epsilon convincingly won both, granting them a face-off against Fnatic in the quarterfinals. A convincing 2-0 win later, they moved on to face Cloud9, first seed from the NA scene in the semi-finals. In one of the closest world sets of their entire run, the Epsilon boys managed to eke out a 3-2 victory over the powerhouse NA team, and moved on to face another powerhouse NA team in the finals. Enemy Esports have been on a similar trajectory to Epsilon throughout 2015, having to qualify into Worlds from the lower bracket where they faced Avant-Garde, the OCE representative at Worlds, and then Fnatic, winning both sets. Then taking down Paradigm, the number 1 seed in EU, in a convincing 3-1 win in the semi-finals on the other side of the bracket. Needless to say, these two rising star teams were on a collision course going into the World's 2016 finals. However, Epsilon were unperturbed by Enemy's legendary run, and with a quick hold my beer, they 3-0'd the team that many thought had real potential to be winners of this tournament. This was an incredible set overall, and to be fair, the 3-0 scoreline doesn't do the Enemy roster justice. They were even in the lead most of Game 3, but faltered at Epsilon's incredible team play in the late game. This set is potentially worth going over on its own in more detail, so let me know if you want to see that. But the scoreline doesn't lie. Epsilon cut Enemy's run short and took home the $500,000 prize and the bragging rights of being the second world champions to ever grace Smite. But of course, they weren't done. Where many rosters made changes going into Season 3 or even disbanded entirely, Epsilon stuck it out with the same 5 players for another season. I mean, who could blame them after a 3-0 victory in Worlds Finals? They were on top of the world and weren't about to give that up lightly. After org switching back to their original Panthera name that they were with before they were picked up by Epsilon, the boys continued their reign of terror over the EU Pro League, placing first in the Spring Split, placing first in the Smite Masters LAN 2016, and even placing first in their own tournament, the Epsilon Invitational. Nothing was stopping them now, and they were going into Season 3 Worlds with the world at their fingertips. After yet another org switch to NRG Esports, this time the boys wouldn't have to fight through the lower bracket, as they placed first in every event in the regular season and thus were EU's first seed going into Worlds, giving them a bye into the quarterfinals where they faced Team Allegiance. They were no match for the might of NRG and got 2-0'd in short order, leaving NRG to face Luminosity, who, much like Enemy before them, were on their own underdog run, only qualifying into Worlds via the wildcard bracket and having to fight through 2 rounds of best of 1 matches. Luminosity were undefeated so far in this tournament, and like Cloud9 from last year, they absolutely gave NRG a run for their money in this set, with it eventually ending 3-2 in NRG's favour, but not super convincingly. This one had fans on the edge of their seats cheering for either side in this NA versus EU grudge match. Luminosity takes 3rd place and NRG moves on to face Obey Alliance, another EU team in the grand finals. Obey had also been on a tear in this tournament, basically doing the same thing as Luminosity but from the other side of the bracket, qualifying in through 2 elimination rounds, then 2-0ing Saw Gaming in the quarters and 3-2ing NA Team Eager in the semis. Both semi-finals in this tournament were NA versus EU, and both were extremely competitive, ending 3-2 in favour of the EU teams both times, which leads us to the grand finals, EU versus EU. A lot rested on NRG agree here, as if they won this set, not only would they be the first back-to-back world champions, they would also have won 2/3 of all world championships to that point. Adapting, Dimi, Yamin, Rafa, and Emil did not disappoint. In a pretty convincing 3-1 win over Obey, they took the title and became the first and only back-to-back worlds winners with the exact same roster. A truly legendary run. However, that record could be put to the test at the 2024 World Championships this year, as the Camelot Kings featuring Variety, Captain Twig, BMT, Genetics, and Hardcore have stayed together after their 2023 Worlds win, following a similar path to the Epsilon of old. Could they do it? Could they join the Epsilon boys as another team that has won Worlds back-to-back with the same roster? We shall see.